Why is the church, why are you planting a church on this corner if it's not to help this community?
What's up, everybody? This is Lisa Fields, the founder and president of the Jude 3 Project, and I'm so excited because we have season 2 of Why Don't Go. Now, if you've been tracking with us for any amount of time, you know that we have a very popular series that we started last year called Why Don't Go. And the purpose of Why Don't Go is to sit down with young adults to discuss why they left the church. And the first part, we just love to listen to them. I feel like listening is an act of love, and we can't be good apologists if we're not good listeners. So the first part of this series, I'll just be listening to them for 4 episodes. And then we'll have Q&A where they'll get to ask me and my co-host Rasul Berry some hard-hitting questions about church and the faith. Season 2 is located in the beautiful city of Washington, DC. I know you're going to enjoy the conversation. I'm so excited that you tuned back in with us for episode 6. I hope you enjoyed the last episode where we answered a hard-hitting question about the church and faith, and this will be no different. I hope you enjoy it.
Tish, I was thinking about what I was going to ask, and I remembered something that you had mentioned, and we were talking in the previous conversation about the church's relevancy. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, especially I feel with the younger generations, they question how relevant the church is to me. The other part of that is, in times past, the church was the bedrock of the community. We just had the hurricane. We just had, in Philly there was floods, and in Delaware there were floods. New York there were floods. Down south, there was terrible hurricanes, and the church was always a bedrock of the community where they would open their doors and open you in. You come in, there was food, there was resources, and apart from, let's say, the mega churches, you're not seeing that same level of community involvement and engagement that you did in times past. And working in government, where when I first got into politics, the elected official that I worked for, he said, where's the churches in all of this conversation? How come they're not at the table trying to help, address some of these issues? Why is it on us? And it got me thinking, what happened? Because there was a time when we were a part of building the communities. So I'd love to get your thoughts on how do we build back that relevancy, not only just for the younger generation, but in our community, so people know why we're here. Why is the church, why are you planting a church on this corner if it's not to help this community?
That's a great question. I'd like to kind of jump in there in light of being a teaching pastor, in a church. Our church is 6.5 years old right now, so we're still very young. But our lead pastor started the church for people who didn't like going to church. That was the goal. Our mission is to reach people where they are and help them grow. Perhaps that's part of the reason why our average age is about 27, 28, but it's been growing a lot. And what we understood, and as we engage with our core audience of those who were drawn to us, was that there was this sense of irrelevancy that a lot of the folks who had stopped going, had kind of dropped out of church, had experienced. But then when they heard the vision and they saw the way that we were approaching things in a non-traditional way, right? The music that we would, either worship with and sing, doing Travis Green stuff or doing some other, aspects, just contemporary. But the communication style as well, was one that in the topics, we did a sermon series, Love, Sex, and Dating, the truth about those things. I did a sermon series on God of Freedom, looking at the issue of the American church and slavery throughout time. Looking at is Christianity a white man's religion? Like these type of things that are the conversation out there we're bringing those conversations into the church, and we've seen a lot of people resonate with that and connect with that. But oftentimes, to answer your question, what happened, right? Because when you think about the civil rights movement, or look at that PBS special and the Black church, and you see, this, it was a bedrock of that movement, right? Like what happened, I think if we were to be honest, and this is where going back to who are the people that we're informed by, there was a lot of ageism that was a part of the church experiences that many of us grew up with. That also was a reflection of our lives and our home experiences too. You don't question what somebody older than you said, and if you do, then you get rolled over. And the problem with that is when you have a society that shifts from kind of being primarily in charge, those who are in charge in their 50s, 60s and up, right? And then it shifts to quicker, technologically more savvy. All of a sudden people, are sharing and have all this clout, right, online that actually permeates into the real world. You find that the world is passing you by. You know what I mean? And that drain, which should have never been the case anyway, right? The sense of we should have a respect and an appreciation for our elders, but that should go both ways. And oftentimes, too often that didn't. And so then it created a disconnect, and then it created a sense of obsolescence where now you're trying, okay, now you were just yelling at me for the fact that you saw no value in the internet, you saw no value in social media, but now now the world is shut down. Who are you asking for to figure out how to have a Facebook Live, right? So, or how do you work this phone? And so I think that we need a more healthy, multi-generational vision that sees a value. And some of that goes deep into our own cultural backgrounds that gets imputed and spiritualized. Don't question the man of God, touching not God and his prophet and all that stuff, where it's like, I just was asking a question based on something that I see, or I'm just trying to help you see things and experience things in a new way. And I think that's the internal challenge that exists. But at the same time, one last thing I'll say too, though, is often these congregations, like for instance, we launched a, Be the Bridge when COVID first hit New York City super hard. And we raised over $50,000 to help people pay their rent when they were out of work and actually get food. There was no news cameras around for that. We launched a campaign, Help for Haiti, to kind of help with the earthquake. So sometimes there's a lot more happening. There was a University of Pennsylvania study that showed that the average church in a community offers annually over $1.5 million in services. When you look at childcare, when you look at counseling services and these type of things, but nobody knows about them as well. So I think that while there's a lot more to be done in a lot more spaces and a lot more engagement with younger people, it's overblown, I think, in terms of the public perception, because y'all kicked out all the people, or y'all didn't invite the people who could have helped tell your story, because that's what marketing is. So now nobody knows what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very good. I will also add, as it relates to relevance, and when we talk about issues of mental health, how to discuss things, I think there's an educational gap for our generation. We are the most educated Black generation. And so when we think about the questions we're asking, it's because of our exposure. And the generation before us didn't have the exposure, not college. Many of us are the first generation to go to college. So our exposure is different. We just see the world different because we've been exposed to more. And so for them, they're operating off of very limited understanding. And so when they had depression, it's not that depression just appeared in our communities. They've dealt with it, but they've dealt with it in suppression. They've dealt with it by turning praise and worship into the way in which they express or get out frustration. I never forget, I heard a pastor said, many of y'all think people are crying because they feel a spirit. They're crying because this is the only place they can cry without anybody asking them what's wrong. And they use the altar as their therapists. And then, some of them just aren't emotionally healthy anyway. That's why you get so many mean mothers at church, because they're just not emotionally healthy. And so we're just like, y'all are mean. And really their meanness sometimes is trying to show that they're unhappy with themselves. They're struggling with their identity, but they just don't have an outlet to express it. And so I think that educational gap is really big. And so we're asking questions based on what we learned in school, and they have no frame of reference for that. So I think that's one of the aspects that we often miss, that there is an educational gap as well. And that's why there's so much irrelevance and disconnect, because our experiences are different.
Man, that was an amazing question. I hope you got something out of it. Stay tuned for another question next week. God bless.
Why do we have some preachers, I won't say all, but some preachers that overemphasize sin? And I never really understood that. It's like, doesn't Jesus cover all of our sins? So why are we beating people with the Bible? Like, why? Like, I'm trying to figure this out.